So the concept is constructors. Okay, constructors in Java. Yeah, so the first thing we need to understand is what are constructors, or what is a constructor, and why is a constructor very important in Java. A thumbs up if you can all see my screen. Thumbs up if you can all see my screen, so that I'm not teaching myself. Okay, cool. So we need to know what a constructor means. Now, a constructor is a method sometimes it's called a special. It's not like any other method. There's a way it behaves. A special method with the same name as the class, okay, and is used to initialize objects. Okay, so that's a constructor. It is a special method with the same name as the class and is used to initialize objects. Now, the first thing you need to besides being a special method with the same name as the class, you need to know that a constructor does not have a return type. Now, we held one of the sessions a few weeks ago, and we saw that methods have return types, either void, boolean, string, etc. Those return types. But a constructor does not have a return type. Okay, so you can say constructors do not have, a constructor does not have a return type. Constructors do not have return. It's good to use say constructor does not have a return type. Okay, so you don't expect a constructor to be having void, int. No. It does not have. Instead, it has got it has the same name as the class, and it has the same name as the class, and and it does not have any return type. Then next is, because we've talked about the return type, we know the method signature, or how we define a method. It is the return type, the method name, then the parenthesis, and next is the body, the method body, which we start or which we define by putting the curly brackets. Okay, we are very familiar with that. So next we can basically look at how, for example, we can define what categories of constructors do we have. So first of all, we have what we call a default constructor. I think I talked about it the last session when I was talking about methods, that even though, for example, this class, when you look at it, it does not have any constructor. You don't have any method that has this same name as this class student. But by default, even though it's not created, it is there. We have that default constructor, and that default constructor sometimes it's called no arguments constructor, no args, no arguments constructor. Okay, so it's default constructor or no arguments constructor. And when we say default constructor, the reason as why they call it no args constructor, it's because the default constructor does not have any parameters. Okay, during the session for classes, we saw that you can have a method that takes in parameters, and you can have a method that does not take in any we can have a method that has parameters and a method that does not have parameters. So the one that a constructor that has no parameters, we call it default constructor that has no parameters, while a constructor with parameters, we call it parameterized constructor, meaning that it is a constructor that takes in parameters. And a constructor is normally called when you're instantiating a class. Well, what do I mean? That it is called when you're creating objects. Okay, well, remember when you're creating an object, if you say the class is student, so student, maybe the object name is s equals new student. Now the method that is called after the keyword new is the constructor. So the constructor is automatically called when an object is created, or it's automatically called when a class is instantiated. Next that I can talk about is that constructors can be overloaded. Now I think during methods I did not talk about method overloading and method overriding. I think I could have missed out that, but maybe we shall go back and look at those two concepts. Now, method overloading, before we look at constructor overloading, method overloading is where you have the same, the same method name, but different parameters. In other words, the method name is the same, but the method signatures are different. Okay, that's what we call method overloading. An example can be just a quick one to look at method overloading before we look at constructor overloading. You can have maybe calculate, a method called calculate area. Okay, and it says int a, maybe int b, and then it says return a plus b or times b. Okay, so you can have this method, the first one. Next you have int calculate area, then it has int a comma int b. Okay, int a, int b, maybe int c. Okay, and then it says maybe return that, maybe in this has like 0.5 times that. So if you look at this, okay, we can just put a 3. If you look at this, we have two methods. Both they have the same name, calculate area, but the first one takes in two arguments, int area. Another one takes in, the first one takes in int a, another one takes in int b. The next one is also also called calculate area, but it has 3 parameters, that's a, b, and c. So if you have a method with the same name but different method signatures, now when we talk about method signature, we talk about the name of the method and the number of parameters, the parameters and their data types, and the order in which they are passed to the method. The method signature means the method name, next the parameters passed into the method, their order, and the data types. Okay, so this, what makes this method different from this is because it has three parameters. This one has 2, this has 3. But you can also change and say maybe double. Okay, maybe double. Okay, so we can change, if you want, we can say also double here, and so it is the same name, calculate area, 2 parameters, but the difference is then this one takes in integer double, but this one int. It's not about the names. some people will say this one is x, then y, then this one int, and then they say int, and after that they will say x times then y. No, it's not about changing the variable names. No, it's about the data types of the parameters and the order in which they are passed. How many are they, for example? So that's why this one is showing an error, because this method is same as this. They are both taking in two parameters which are both integer. Okay, so it doesn't matter whether you've changed their names or not, it is still the same method. So it's about the data type of the parameters and the order in which they are passed. Okay, so we can just say int z and then times z. So this one has changed. This is method overloading because the method signatures of the two methods are different. Okay, this one takes into parameters, this one takes in 3 parameters. Okay, so I just wanted to talk about that before we look at constructor overloading. So that's why I said that constructors can be wait a minute, constructors can be overloaded. Now we have the concept of overloading since I've explained method overloading. Remember, constructors are also methods. So when I talk about method overloading, it's more like this. But just that, remember, for constructors they don't have return type, and yes, they don't have return type. So you don't expect int here and you don't expect to return here. So we're going to look at an example. So yeah, then lastly, if no constructor is defined, then Java provides a default constructor which I've called if there is no constructor provided in Java, by default there is what we call a default stroke no arguments constructor. Okay, no arguments constructor. Okay, so that's basically it. Now I can remove this. So now we can go straight and we look at what we've talked about. Well, first we said that a constructor is a special method with the same name as the class and is used to initialize objects. Okay, so we say it does not have return type. So we said it has the same name as the class. So our class name is called student. So this is what now we call the default constructor. Okay, and they're saying that a default constructor, we said, has no arguments. That's why the parenthesis is empty, nothing within the parenthesis. That's why we called it no arguments or default constructor. And even if you don't put it there by default, if you look at this last point, by default it is there. Okay, so assume this the attributes of students. For example, we have a student has maybe a name and maybe a student has age. Okay, now we can first of all, let's first consume a default constructor. Assume it's not there. Okay, we've said even if it is not there, then Java assumes it is there. Okay, so how do we create an object? We say student maybe s equals new student. Now we've said we said that a constructor is automatically called when you're creating an object. Now we've created an object and it's called s. Now the word what comes after this new keyword, it's the constructor, meaning that this one that you're seeing, student then brackets, this brackets is a constructor. It's like a method call. Remember, when you call a method, when you define a method, you have to define it. You have to define it and then call it later. So this student then parenthesis means it's a constructor, because we've said that when you're creating an object, that's when constructors are automatically called. So even though it is not there, because we don't see anywhere this method being called, it's there because you come back to this point that if there's no constructor provided in Java, by default it is there. So someone who has done this, who has created a default constructor by themselves, is same as the one who has not created it, because by default Java defines this default constructor. Okay, so that's why we can be able to go ahead and say s dot age, because we have these attributes for the student name and age. So we can say s dot name equals Fred, and then s dot age equals maybe 20. Okay, so because we are accessing these attributes because the class has name and age as the attributes, and therefore you can come and print and say system dot out dot print line, and you say s dot name, we concatenate, we say is maybe plus s dot age, then years old. Okay, so if we run this, we should be able to get Fred is 20 years old. Okay, Fred is 20 years old. Okay, so that's why you're saying here on our console, Fred is 20 years old. So you can just put a space here, then we compile, then you will have Fred is 20 years old. So in this case we have created an object. Okay, s. We've said that when you're creating an object, the constructor is automatically called after this new keyword, that this student is now the constructor. Okay, so this is an example of default constructor. Assume we put like string n, Now when we say string n, if we say string n, you see now we have an error here. If you look at this, we have some red line here. Why? Is because the constructor that we've defined takes in one parameter, which is n, but here we are calling a default constructor which is not there. Once you have a constructor like this, it means that you no longer have the default unless you define the default yourself, or unless you overload the constructor, meaning that you will have multiple instances of the constructor. But in this case, you only have one constructor, and that constructor takes in one parameter. But here you're calling a constructor that does not take in any parameter. Okay? Meaning that it's wrong because you don't have any constructor that takes in no arguments or parameters. So the solution is you define another, you overload the constructor and create one that takes in 0 parameters, or you remove this one so that you can have a constructor that takes in 0 parameters. Okay, so that's basically it. Now next we've looked at default constructor, which we said is the one that takes in 0 arguments. Let's look at what we call parameterized constructors, meaning that it's a constructor that takes in arguments, okay, or that takes in parameters. Now we can overload this and say student and maybe string n. Okay, string n, and remember a constructor is used to initialize objects. So you can say student, then string n, and then we say that name equals n, and maybe we can say age equals maybe 90. We can hard code the value in this case. So in this case, the constructor that we've created No, this is supposed to be an integer, not a string. But we do have a student who is 90 years old. Maybe 24. So this is a constructor, but this constructor takes in a parameter which is n, and then we are saying that this n, the value which is going to be passed, is going to be initialized to be the value of name here, the attribute name. That's why we are saying name equals n, that the name of this student who will be created using this constructor will be, the name will be the value that will be passed here. So that's why we are saying name equals n, which is the so if you want, you can say underscore name, and then here you say underscore name. Okay, that the name that will be passed here is the one that will be assigned here, okay, to be the name of that student. So in this case, we can create now. This one is now not throwing any error because we have overloaded. We have, if you look at this, we have a default constructor and we have another constructor which has parameters. So this is what we call constructor overloading. Is when you have multiple occurrences of constructors, but the constructor signature is different. This one has no parameters, but this one takes in one parameter. Okay. So now we can create another object and say student maybe s1 equals new student. Okay, then we can, in this case, we are going to pass in a parameter, and when we pass in a parameter, maybe Dorian, now it means that this object s1 has been created using which constructor? Not the first one, but the second one, because the second one is the one that takes in one parameter, which is name. Okay, and we can say that for that student, we are hard coding the value of age to be 24. Okay, so now if we shall just come, I will not waste time, I'll come and get this and paste this one here, and then just say s1, then I say s1, meaning that they will say, what is s1? What is s1's name? It is Dorian, because whatever value we pass here will be initialized. If you pass this name Dorian here, it means that the name of that student will be the value that will be passed, which is Dorian, and then their age is 24. Therefore, they will say Dorian is 24 years old. Okay, so that is an example. Let's first run that. That is an example of a parameterized constructor. That's why they're saying Dorian in the second one. That's why they say Dorian is 24 years old, because the value was passed as an argument here into the constructor, meaning that the constructor being used is the second one. Okay, and of course then 24 years old because we had coded the value here. Now we can look at another example of a parameterized constructor, that instead of passing only age, we can also passing the name, we can also pass the age. So we say, so in this case, this constructor is now taking in two parameters. Now we have overloaded, we've created another constructor, but which is different from the first one, which takes in 0 arguments, and which is different from this, which takes on only one argument name, and which is different. Now this one is different because it takes in two arguments. Then the n, or the n, which is the name, and a, which will be the age. So here we can say name equals n, okay, then age equals a, okay, that n will be the name for the student and a will be the age of the student. So we have overloaded as well. It is also a parameterized constructor because it is taking in arguments, okay, n and a. So we can now call that constructor. Maybe the object, we call it s2. Then we say new student. In this case, we are going to pass two arguments, okay? Maybe Simon, and then the age maybe 22, okay? 22, meaning that for this constructor where we are passing two arguments, now the constructor that is being used is this one, because it is the one that is taking into what? Arguments n and a. n being the name, because we are assigning n to be the name and a to be the age, meaning that for this point, for this object s2, it is being created using a constructor, the third constructor, this one, which takes in 2 parameters. Now, I will not waste time. This is, you guys are familiar with this. I'll just copy paste this here and then change this one to s2 and then change this one to s2 as well. Meaning that for this one, they will say Simon is 22 years old because s2.name is Simon and s2.age is the age which we've passed here, which is 22. So if I run, that's why they say Simon is 22 years old. Simon is 22 years old. So yeah, so so far we've talked about the constructor, what it is. We have said the constructor does not have a return type. If you can see that this is a method, but it does, you don't come here and say int. It will be wrong. You can't say int student because constructors do not have return types. Or you say void. It's wrong. It's wrong to do that. Then we are saying that constructors can be overloaded, okay? And constructor overloading is where you have constructors with the same name but different constructor signatures. For example, this is a constructor but takes in 0 parameters. This one is a constructor but takes in 1 parameter, and this one is another constructor but it takes in 2 parameters n and a. Okay, so these are, you have overloaded them. The method is the constructor name is the same, student, but the parameters are different and the order in which they are passed, which means the constructor signature is different. And we said that if there is no constructor provided in Java, then by default there is what we call a default or no arguments constructor, which is this. Now, lastly is using a constructor can call another constructor. a constructor can call another constructor. Now for this default constructor, okay, for this default constructor, I can say that I can call, for example, this, we have 3 constructors. We have this one which takes in 1 parameter, we have this one which takes in 2 parameters, and then we have this which has no parameters. So with this one which takes in 0 parameters, I can say this, and when I say this, it is going to call another constructor. It means a constructor. When you say this, you're calling the constructor. So in this case, I can call this one that takes in both the name, the n and age. So I can say maybe Darlington, and maybe I can say is maybe 21 years old. Okay, meaning that this default constructor is calling this constructor, the one which takes in the name, the n and a. Okay, and if I remove this, let's first do this. So here you are saying it has Fred is 20 years old and Fred and 20, because these values we've had coded act as initial values. Now if I remove this, okay, and then I run, I expect now to be having Darlington, because it's calling a super, it's calling the other constructor, which it's that's why here it has now changed from Fred to Darlington, because this default constructor, I'm saying this, meaning that it is calling another constructor, and when I say this, you look at the parameters passed to determine which constructor has been called. Now you ask yourself which constructor is taking in 2 arguments. It is this one of n and a, meaning that it will get Darlington to be the name and age to be this. If I say this, okay, if I only pass this, it means it's going to go and call a constructor that only takes in the name, which is this. So it will say Darlington is 24 years old instead of 21, because when you pass in one argument, it will call this one, the one which takes in only the name, and the age is 24. So we expect if we run this, we say Darlington is 24 years old. Okay, you see, Darlington is 24 years old. So you can create a constructor which calls in another one. Say this. If you say this, it is going to call a constructor. But since we have different constructors, which one is going to be called? Now, if you pass only the name, it is going to call this one. If you pass maybe age, maybe 50, then to mean it's going to call this the second one. Since the constructor that takes in two arguments is this one, the one of N and A. Okay, so you can use this. Now, lastly, sometimes you will have to find people call this, instead of N and A, people will say string name, and here name, okay, and then age here as well. Okay, we have passed name here and age, which are the same as the attributes of the class. So here you see there is a confusion. They don't know which name. Is it this name? Are you saying name equals name, this name, or do you mean the name for the attribute? Even here. So to distinguish, if you were to mean the name, these attributes, to assign them the values of this name, because they are the same, now it's getting confused. But if I put like N here, you see it changes, meaning that you will see it will even change color here. To even change color, you see that for name, now it has changed the color, meaning that they are referring to this one. For age, it's not, because it's being confused. Are you saying, are you reinitializing the value that is being passed, or you are initializing the age, which is the attribute of the student as a class? So in order to avoid this conflict, particularly when you use the same, when the parameters of the constructor, the variable, when the parameters, the parameter names are the same as the attributes, in order to avoid those the conflicts, you will say this dot. When you say this dot, you are referring to the attribute of the class, which is this. And therefore, when you say also this dot age, you are also meaning this attribute age. That this dot age, meaning the attribute of the class, you are saying that the value is going to be this value age. And this dot name, you are referring to the attribute of the class, and you're saying it will be equal to the value of the name which will be passed here. And when you run that, it will be the same literally. Nothing will change. Okay, nothing will change. So I need to make sure that I echo on that you can use this dot name if you know that the parameter names for the constructor are the same as the attribute names for the class. So that's basically what I wanted to demonstrate to you. So today you've learned what a constructor is, and we've said it's a special method with the same name as the class and used to initialize objects. And we've also said the constructor does not have return types. Secondly, we've looked at a concept that we call constructor overloading, and we've said constructor overloading is where you have constructors with the same name but different constructor signatures. And what do we mean by constructor signatures? We mean the parameters that are being passed to the constructor and the order in which they are passed. Okay. Then we've said in the case there is no constructor provided in Java, there is always a default constructor, and we've been able to look at all of these practically. I invite any questions if there is before I close this off. Any questions? Any questions? Any questions? Any questions? If you have any question, please, you can unmute and ask. You can unmute and ask. So I want to keep these concepts short so that you can easily go through them instead of covering very many things at a time. Okay, if there are no questions, then
Yes, sir.
yes, any questions, please?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for the session. Now, is there any instance where the parameter names can be different from the attribute names?
Yes, it's the one that it's the one that we looked at. For example, if I say n and I say a, okay, then here it's not a must that they must be the same, because these are just variable names to indicate. N indicates name, so you see that the attribute names, it's name. The attribute names, you have name and age, but but the parameters, one is n, which indicates name, then another one is a, which indicates age. So they are different. The argument for name is being passed as n. The argument for age is being passed as a. So they are different. So in this case, I don't have to put this dot. If you want, you can also put it there. There's no problem with that. There's no harm in that. Okay, but if they are not, there is no need to use this. If they are, I'm saying there's no harm for if you use this in if they are different. If there's n and name, if there's a and age, there's no need to use this dot name, this dot age. But even though you put it, it's okay, because you clearly indicate that this indicates the attribute name. And yeah, so have you seen the case, the instance that you're asking for?
Yes, yes.
Yes, you can see that the name is being passed as n and age is being passed as a.
All right, thank you.
Welcome. Any other question or any more questions before we close this off? Uh, any questions? Any questions? So if you want, you can actually use scanf to pass these variables. For example, here we are passing, since you guys are very familiar, you can say now just a quick one. I never wanted to go this far. Java.ut.scanner class, because scanner class is the one which is going to help you to capture input. So here, instead of hard coding these values, the Dorian, the Simon, you can use the scanner class to get input. So you can say input equals new scanner, and then system.in, and so we can ask for the name. So say system.out.print line, we say enter your name, okay. Then we terminate, and then I say we can define them as variables. So I can say string name equals, I say input dot next next. If you want, you can use next line, yeah. And next you say system dot out dot print line, and then you say enter your age, okay. After this, what do we do? Escape for this, terminate. Can say int age equals input dot next int, okay, because you are capturing integer. So instead of passing here name Simon, I can put name, I can pass age, okay, yeah, so that the program becomes dynamic. And after here, I can close my input, scan to close the scanner object. It's important to close this the scanner object. So here we are capturing name from the keyboard, and from the user, we tell the user to enter their name and age. Then when we are calling the constructor, the one that takes into parameters, we pass these values, the name, which the user will enter, and then the age. So here what will be printed will be the name of the, through which we are accessing through the object s.name and s.age. So if I run, enter your name, John, enter your age, 12. So, and you see John, then they print John is 12 years old. Why? Because we entered name as John. If I want, we can even remove this next line so that they don't insert a new line, so you can recompile. It's up to you. You can always play around these programs. Okay, it's compiling, I believe. Yes. So name Timothy, age maybe 15. So they say Timothy is 15 years old, so you can also use that. And if you look at the values that we are printing, we are not printing the name and age directly. No, we are accessing the values through the object, s dot name. We are not saying, some of you will come and do this like name and then you say age. If you use this, then you're not looking at what you're not implementing what you are looking at, because we are looking at consuming constructors, and we consume them when you are creating objects, so that we need to say s2 dot name and s2 dot age. Allow me to bring this to close if there are no questions, but if there are, please, here is your opportunity to come through.
Sir, could you just elaborate on the difference when you use print ln and then print?
Print ln inserts a new line. Print does not insert a new line. Okay. If, for example, I'm going to just do just an example here, I can actually use it here. If you say print and then print, okay, the two statements, the first one I think was Darrington and Dorin will be in the same line, because print does not insert a new line, print ln inserts a new line. Okay, if you compile, you find that Darrington and Dorin are in the same set. There are two sentences, but they are in one line. You can see Darrington is 50 years old, then after that Dorin is 24 years old, in one line. But if you put like ln, if you put, for example, ln on the first one, what will happen is that after printing Darrington is 50 years old, then the Dorin is 24 years old will come on the next line. Okay, so if you run this, you expect that after Darrington is 50 years old, then for Dorin, it will have to start on a new line. Please run again. So you can see that for Dorin, it is coming on the new line. After Darrington is 50 years old, then you have Dorin coming next. Now you see for Dorin is 24 years old and enter your name are in the same line. So in order to make sure that they are not like in one sentence, you need to make sure that after after printing Dorin is 24 years old, you put ln. If you use print ln, if you use print line, it will insert a new line after printing the statement that Dorin is 24 years old. So if we compare that, we will see that we have Dorin being in the next line. As you can see, Dorin is 24 years old. After that, it inserts a new line, and the next statement that comes, comes in a new line. Have I answered your question?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any more questions before I close? Any more questions? Any more questions? So, of course, our session will be on YouTube. For those people who want to follow up, I will upload this on YouTube so that you can, go through, practice, and practice constructors, practice constructor overloading, etc. Everything that we've just looked at in this session. So yeah, we can bring it across from here.